Welcome everybody for a conversation around the future financial health of small and medium legal practices here in Australia and New Zealand. And today's guest, I have with me one Mr. Rob Knowsley, who's consulted to more than 1,300 firms over his decades of career, both as a lawyer and as now as a consultant to law firms. So welcome, Rob. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me to work with you on this one.
Well, I know we've had some very interesting conversation before we came on air, and I might actually start when people leave law school, they are informed that if they'd like to make $100,000 a year in salary, they should bill $300,000 on the myth, as you claim, of a third, and profits in law firms roughly come out around that figure. And I know recently I saw from a bank where they claimed that the average gross profit in a legal practice in this country was 35%. And I know we might start because I know you've got some commentary on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's something I've been trying to debunk as a myth in the legal profession for 35 years now. The big problem with that one third myth is that obviously it's talking about 1/3 of revenues being for salaries and 1/3 being for other expenses and 1/3 left over for the owners to share. The only problem is that it doesn't take into account that in the expenses, the salary aspect of the expenses, no allowance is made for principals. In some firms, I mean, obviously in a sole practice, the only person working there is a principal. So if they're not allowing for that person's salary, you can see the lack of logic. But in most firms in this sector, this small, medium law firm sector, the largest number of people working there are principals. And the majority of them are full-time. I mean, obviously, we've got some that might be coming and going with parental leave responsibilities, and we've got some who might be working their way towards retirement and working shorter weeks and whatever, but you can still pay pro rata, which is what my clients do. So we've got a situation where firms can be described as making partner profits of, sake of round number, $250,000. But when you look at the fact that in their firms, very often a senior associate or even a salaried partner is probably going to be paid at the top of the range $180,000 package, then the partners should be paying themselves a package of something that's 20 to 25% higher. So, I would suggest a minimum of $200,000 and probably $225,000. So if they think they're making $250,000, they're actually only making $25,000 a year. The rest is salary that they could get if they went down the road, worked for someone else. So it's misleading, and it's at the root of partners not planning properly and not budgeting properly, which will lead us into one of the other topics that I know that you want to raise with me.
I think it'd be a good insight if you could help people listening today to understand the sorts of things that people should be budgeting for, and where you see, frankly, errors of judgment that you could help guide them on that would help them to be more profitable.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the biggest problem is that most of the time spent in budgeting is spent on the least important thing, and that's expenses. Expenses in law firms are fairly tight. They don't vary a lot. There's not a lot of room for trimming them, and in some areas that we'll discuss later, there really is room for expanding them. But what we really should be spending the time on in law firms is budgeting of how we will use the resource, which is the time of the people. And obviously the time of the people is meaningless without the skill sets of the people and everything that goes around that, including their client service capacity and whatever. So, for 35 years, I've been teaching everyone in law firms from the principals down to concentrate on dividing up the amount of time that they are prepared to work or contracted to work, in the case of an employee, into firm time and client time. With firm time, illogically in some people's minds, firm time being the most important, because if you don't know how much time you should be investing in firm time and all the important things that we're going to talk about, then you don't know how much is left over out of the time you're prepared to commit to be spent on client files. So the firm time, is obviously the things like business development and like supervising and mentoring and for partners, getting involved in all the things they have to be involved in managing teams and in, it doesn't stop with partners in managing teams, of course, but things like, the trust account and organising the premises and the insurance. And remember, we're talking small, medium firms. So in large firms, there's always someone to handle most of that stuff that's not a partner, but still the teams have got to be managed. Now, when we look at the opportunity cost of that firm time, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars a year per person. And particularly with the sorts of charge rates, actual or nominal charge rates that people are trying to achieve these days. We know from some of the figures that we discussed earlier today that there are people who are portrayed as only average in terms of what they're charging nearly $600 an hour. Well, they need to budget how they're going to spend the opportunity cost of that on stuff that isn't client files, and work out what are the key things that will make a small business like a law firm, which is a very special type of small business with obligations and responsibilities that a lot of other small businesses don't have, but it's still a small business, how they're going to balance that out and make it run. Because what I see happen time and time again in firms is partners doing too much legal work, which they don't recover properly for, and it leaves them insufficient time for all the other things that are required in running the business well. So they can't actually break out of the catch-22 or the Gordian knot that they're tied up in, because they can't even spend the time to work out how to be getting a better type of client or how to be getting the current type of client pay better fees. And so they just work harder. And if you're trying to show them how to lift their revenues, all they can think of is, I can't work any harder. Well, we all know that, people are wanting to work less and less. But you can work a lot. You really can work a lot smarter. It's not,
So I guess as an interviewer, I can't let you get away with that comment. So I'm going to have to say, if we're going to ask people listening to work smarter, what's on your list of quick wins?
Well, pricing is one of the big ones. I stress to people that you can study pricing, and in particular, you can study value billing informally. There's an enormous amount of material about it, and you can go out and experiment with it. So one of the areas that we talked about earlier was, you mentioned that there was a survey that showed that quite a low proportion of firms in Australia had increased their prices in the last couple of years.
Well, it was 40% of firms had not had a price increase.
40% hadn't had a price increase, yeah. Well, they don't actually need to have a price increase if they don't want to. But what they can do is actually learn how to improve the pricing on most of the work that they're already getting and doing. And what that will do is dramatically change the profitability of the work, because the resources they're using to do the work will remain exactly the same. So if they've got modest profit margins now, so they're above break even, a bit of more intelligent pricing and a little bit of really listening to what drives the client's perception of value, and learning how to put options to clients in a way that taps into the psychology of how people look at their investment in things. You can do simple things like you can give people 4 options where 2 of them are just anchors, and you never expect them to accept either of those 2. So the A and the D options. But you're perfectly happy for them to go for either the B or the C option in between. And the way you've structured it is that they will be able to choose an option that appeals to them, appeals to their perception of value when you relate it to the price you're asking them to invest. And people will find that they can recover multiple times the hourly rate that they presently recover, with clients very, very happy, and no possibility of being accused of recording too much time or whatever, because it doesn't come into the discussion. It's, we will do this for you. We will, do our very, very best to deliver these outcomes, and you will do this to help us, and it will cost you X, and this is how you will pay. You will pay 50% up front, you will pay 25% in a month, and another 25% when we complete it, and that'll be that. And so we've got to get people away from thinking of, recovering 85% or even a bit more of a nominal hourly rate as being the holy grail. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah,
People getting excited about recovering 85% of a silly low rate. They should be getting excited about recovering 5 times a much, much higher rate with a delighted client.
Well, I think there's a lack of confidence here, and I have some empathy when they leave law school. No one actually tells them how to grow a practice in a law school environment. So empathy is on their side. And then for even those who start a career in law and then maybe end up owning a firm, or they start with a larger firm, then set up on their own, which is quite a common thing. They have no perception about where to charge. And quite often when I go to work in boutique firms where people have come out of a larger firm, the first challenge I have to make them is around price. So for example, they might say, I've come out of a big firm where they charge X, so I've decided to charge X less $200 an hour. And I go, well, why don't you do it just X less $100 an hour? And there's an extra $100 an hour for every year you'll work this year. Thank me at the end of the year when you've made an awful lot more money.
Yeah. Or why not, why not dissect the whole thing and realize that what was being charged at the big firm was inappropriate in the first place, and you can probably do even better than they were doing. And also you might not be locked into a whole lot of the ways they did things, it's very, very important to me that principals back off a bit and realizing that they don't need to be working so hard, particularly if it stops them opening their eyes to realities that are out there, and further, if it stops them actually properly tapping into the resources that they're employing.
So are we getting into the area of leverage here? So we keep hearing about leverage in law firms, and if you use the horrible phrase, moving work further down the food chain.
Yeah, look, I like to turn it around, because I see a lot of small firms hiring law clerks, so they're still studying, and then having graduate lawyers, and then first year out lawyers, and they just have this mindset that those people can't produce much of value for some considerable time, and yet they invest enormous amounts of time in training them, which is fine, but they've got to realize that those people are going to leave. As the sun comes up in the morning, those people are going to leave. It's only a question of when they will be leaving. So it's very important that in training those people, you're training them to do things with you and for you, and to, cover their salary and costs. And it's not at all hard to do. I mean, it's what people used to do way back. It's just a question of saying to people, look, you've got these skill sets. I mean, you almost finished your law degree, or you have finished your law degree. You must have done a bit of research to put some of those papers in you had to put in. Look at your marks, So what I want you to do is do this for me on this matter that I've got, which is very exciting because we're helping these clients in this particular way, and these are the issues, and this is what I'll be doing on the matter. But there's work that can be done at a much lower rate by you for me, to allow me to focus on the more difficult bits that right at the moment, with respect, you could never do. And so let's get on with it. And I'm not going to give 2 hours a day of my time at $685 an hour or better, or, to be training you to do nothing. I will have you working alongside me on real work, and you'll be productive from day one.
Which might also help when people see that investment of one-on-one time from a senior person is more likely to help retention. So there is a significant number of people who move early on in their career, but
absolutely, because they don't get that.
Serious issue.
Yeah, they don't get that, and they say, oh, I can't get access to the partner, and I can't this, and I can't that, and no one in the firm is teaching me anything. Well, the firm's. It's largely the firm's fault, because everybody should have a training plan, and everybody should know it should be developed in dialogue with them, so that everybody knows what it is over what period that they're trying to grow their skill sets in, which will be very rewarding. It will be good for their professional development and their career, make them more valuable, which can only be of interest to everybody. And they'll get to work alongside very, very senior people who need plenty of reliable assistance. And I can see people in firms that I'm helping generating $300,000-400,000 a year in fees before they're qualified. But in other firms, I go in there, they can't produce that 3 years out.
Yeah.
So they've obviously been used incorrectly.
But many people perceive in smaller firms that the big firms have all this sussed. And I'm here to blow that out of the water and say I go to some larger firms where induction programs are still a challenge, and they don't have set things in place for what people to learn and how to build practice. It's just not there. So I can go back into the 80s, showing my age a bit there, when I started, and I was literally given a book with the first 6 months in it. It was like, on Wednesday of week 2, you'll be introduced to this person and they'll teach you this. And on the Thursday of week 7, you'll see Mr. So-and-so will tell you about how the accounting system works. Now, I don't see anything like that in modern firms, which I think is a loss.
Yeah, it's not hard to do. It just requires a little bit of preparation, but almost always when someone's coming onto your team, for some time that they're coming. I mean, you've got a pretty good idea from when you met them and spoke with them and decided to make an offer. There was quite a good chance they might say yes, and then you knew, because they'd told you, that they had to give a month's notice where they were. So, it was easy to actually do some preparation. And it pays off, and it's I hate saying win-win because it just sounds trite, but there's no doubt that it's a serious win-win, because when they leave, and not everybody stays. We know that. Very, very few people stay for long term these days. When they leave, they will be well armed for the remainder of their career, and the firm will have had proper benefit from what they've invested into them while they've been there. And that's where you get part of your leverage from.
And you get brand and reputation in the market for doing a good job with people as they move and progress around the place, I guess.
Look, if you get it right, it goes even further. It goes to the point where your people are being headhunted all the time, which isn't the end of the world. It's a compliment, and it raises other challenges, but it just means that you've got to work extra hard at creating your point of difference for the kind of people you want to work with you. And the flip side is there are people who don't want to work with you. You know what I mean? Just face it. And they won't want to work with you. If you manage to get them to work with you now on the basis of, say, salary or a sign-on bonus or something, as soon as they find an opportunity to go where they would prefer to have been working in the first place, they'll be gone. So, you know, you've got to work very hard on that whole issue of identifying it.
If I might just try and flush this out, on points of difference, what would appear on your list?
Well, I have to laugh because I'm still seeing firms coming out and all over social media and here and there saying, you know, we've introduced a day off for people on their birthday. You know, it's like saying we've suddenly discovered there's an internet. You know, it's hysterical.
There's more to culture than having beanbags in the staff room.
Absolutely, or you know, or pool table in the tea room. Yeah, it's the whole exercise. It's going through with your people now, and then layering on, talking with potential talent, the kinds of things that drive them. It's very much like business development on the internet. There's no point coming up with some great idea and going out there and writing all sorts of stuff and launching things and then discovering that no one's interested, you know. So one of the things that's particularly interesting to people these days, obviously, not everybody, but obviously big numbers of people, is genuine flexible working, and a clear, really clear, demonstrably clear expectations with responsibility to deliver in your own way, in your own time, if you like, you know, subject to some rules. But things like find out whether someone is interested in a paid car space. Find out whether anyone is interested in any kind of, you know, gym memberships. Don't worry about finding out if people want income protection insurance. Provide it for everybody. Have a wellness program that is not, you know, when it's dissected, a load of hot air. Have a wellness program that is provided on contract by specialists and not just for work-related issues. Treat the family who work around you as family. So if they've got issues at all, they should be able to access the wellness support from professionals. And the list goes on and on and on and on and on. You know, one firm that I work with in New Zealand, they've been going for 103 years, and they've got a tradition that on Fridays, one of the staff, doesn't matter who it is, there's no gender issue or whatever, but one of the staff bakes fresh scones, and everybody sits down in the morning, somewhere in the morning, and has fresh scones and whatever together. And it's a bit of a laugh. But, you know, you don't go out and sort of say, hey, if you come to our firm, you get fresh scones on Friday. You know,
no, but that leads me on to another topic I wish to mention here, and that is all the good things that do go on in firms. And when you're looking to attract and maintain the best talent, for which there is a genuine war in the market at the moment, even if they were doing all the good things you talked about, it's very rare to actually see these on a website or people talk about it.
Well, they don't do it. They're scared. They're traditionalists. They're scared. If, you know, I do it probably once a week. I go through what's being advertised on Seek and have a look in different marketplaces. And I promise you, 99% of the ads are bland and boring.
Yeah.
And they don't even properly describe the job. They don't talk package. They don't talk philosophy behind the package. They don't talk culture. And I teach the opposite. I say, go out there and give it your 110% best shot. You've worked out what your differentiation is. Go tell people.
Well, lots of people, there's the first thing. As a marketer, I think a lot of firms struggle to know what that differentiation is. With the younger generation, they want to know what the purpose of the firm is. So we're running off into, territory around, circles of influence, and, everyone's heard about purpose and what's your why. Okay, so I don't see that a lot in law firms to share with younger generations. But it's what's your purpose beyond making profit? Why do you exist? And smaller firms,
I'd like them to get to making profit.
Sure, but a lot of them don't know that. So if I was going to go and work at a law firm, you tend to think, well, I want to understand the type of work I'm going to do and the type of clients I'm going to do it for. And quite often, that information is not always available to be found. And it's quite secretive. And people are reluctant to admit who they work for in case someone pinches them. And I've never understood that.
Well,
the positioning is so important.
been there as long as I've been in the law, which is longer than a lot of people would want to admit. But what I'm trying to do with firms is get them to understand that you can have all these sort of old-fashioned beliefs you like, but they're not going to do you any good if your firm's closed down.
Yeah.
You've got to start breaking a few eggs, to get some decent omelets going. And don't want to use too many metaphors, but the proof's in the pudding. If you can get people coming from the other end of the country, and that was the other one too, was where appropriate, talk to us about removal expenses. We'll cover your removal expenses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's stopping being excruciatingly secretive and traditional, because everybody does that. It's hardly a differentiation. You just, and the fact that you've been around 100 and something years, I know you're very big on this, it's meaningless. It's like the All Blacks and the Wallabies. Good day to day to talk about it. You're only as good as your last game, and you're only as good as tonight. Yeah. Doesn't matter how many years you've been around.
Well, that takes me on to slightly off topic, but biographies of lawyers and law firms frustrate the life out of me, because people talk about the longevity of a firm or the longevity of someone in practice, and I meet really good lawyers who are 10 years out, and I meet really ordinary ones who are my age in the 50s. So longevity in itself is not a reason why I'm going to hire you. I want to know what you've achieved in those years. So give me some stories and numbers that are going to mean something to me, rather than just a history lesson. And that happens a lot in a lot of firms.
Again, it comes back to that playing things close to the chest, getting confused about confidentiality. I mean, people say to me, aren't you worried about confidentiality? I say, why? The firm that I said was made up of, 6 blokes in Queensland was actually in Victoria, and it was made up of 5 women and 1 guy. What does it matter? Just giving examples, and where you've got a fabulous example, really fabulous, the firm should be happy and will confirm, if you check it with them, should be happy to talk about the success. Sure. You'd be a bit worried if they weren't.
Well, I'm always a big believer in talking about the type of clients you work with. I think industry sector specialism is massive. All firm clients are not equal, and with this being a focus on small and medium practices, I am going to put this out there, and this might seem controversial, but I warn small firms about being overly reliant on conveyancing. So I might go in small firms who rely on 1/3 to 1/2 of the revenue in residential conveyancing. And I'm like going, if there's one area that we keep hearing about that legal tech is going to really make a dent in the next 3 to 5 years, that's it. And so I'd be reluctant on trying to build a practice around residential conveyancing. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I've been counselling people on that for over 30 years, but it's even worse if they're not charging properly.
Sure.
And they're doing it on volume. And I've seen firms doing hundreds of conveyances a month, hundreds a month, with a 2% profit margin. I mean, you know, I could have shown them, well, I did, showed them in 15 minutes how to, you know, treble the profit margin immediately, and there would be no reduction in work. But if you kept pushing the price envelope, we could make some reduction in work happen if we could get them lucky. You could get, you know, get rid of some resources that you wouldn't need, or next time someone left, don't replace them. Just keep putting the prices up to somewhere close to what represents value for the fabulous service you're giving.
Well, there's a thing.
They don't.
We talk about differentiation and service. When it comes to conveyancing, the messaging I get is, Alistair, we can't differentiate on a conveyance. It's too similar and same, and everyone does it the same. And I went, well, that's quite defeatist.
Well, it's rubbish too.
So the first thing I'll say things like, you know, do you deliver flowers on the day that people move in? And they say no. And I go, well, how many conveyances do you do a year? And they might say, you know, 100. And I go, well, go and buy 100 bunches of flowers from the local florist. You'll get a good deal. And deliver them, and people will talk about it, because when they have a housewarming party, they go, oh, the flowers are lovely. Who got them? The lawyer bought you flowers. That's weird. Yeah. And when, you know, if people are moving, you can give them a list of all, you know, things they might need. So here's a list of a plumber, a gardener, an electrician, a dentist, a doctor, a school, the sports club, all the things that people might need when they go somewhere, and tell all the providers that you're recommending them, because then you get referrals back the other way. So there's heaps of things you can do, but people don't tend to think outside the box.
Well, they won't even see, they won't look at what I might call loosely normal business. You know what I mean? So when people purchase a home and move in, they open the door, they get the keys from the agent, they go and open the door, and they find inside a couple of nice bottles of wine and a lovely basket with tea, coffee, cups, you know, paper towels, all sorts of things, thing of toothpaste, toothbrush, all sorts of stuff that they could use. They're blown away. And as you say, you buy it in bulk, put the stuff together with a lovely card, handwritten from the team. It costs nothing. Yeah. And at any event, the clients have paid for it. And the clients are happy to pay for it. No, they don't know they're paying for that, but they're happy to have paid the fee.
Well, to me, people, you know, the clue's in the title, professional services. So your differentiator is the way you make people feel. And, you know, feel's a word I often write up on a whiteboard in a law firm. And I'll say, people won't remember what you said. They won't always remember what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel in all your touch points. So whether it's a phone call, an email, an in-person conversation, that's what people remember. And that's what you have to get sensational at.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, you know, just as a little aside, you know, a lot of talk now about quiet quitting, and you know, you just got to ask yourself: are people who are quiet quitting going to be giving that kind of exceptional service? And the answer is almost certainly not. So, you know, and the other thing at the moment, of course, is there seems to be a view that it's bad and terribly financially dangerous to lose anybody. Well, you know, I've always been taught and always known and always put into practice that there are some people that if you can lose them, you know, very quickly, hopefully, you know, this afternoon, that's far better than keeping them.
Sure.
That you've just got to make sure you've given them a proper chance to do the right thing before you move them on.
Well, interestingly there, you talked about the motivation of staff and the quiet quitters, right? You also get quiet quitters who are clients for the very same reason.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And so the question, you know, when I go into a firm and I'll say, why do people come to your practice? And they go, Alistair, they come for 3 reasons. They come for price and value. And I go, really? There's always someone in town who'll do it cheaper than you. So we'll put a line through that one. Then I get the quality of the work or the staff is superior. And I go, well, I expect you to say that, but it's difficult to prove. And then they go, the ubiquitous, the service is better. And I go, well, do you measure it? How do you know? And people go, no. And I go, well, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it, and you can't claim it is to be better than anybody else's. So it's a real loss here in Australia, the lack of client service feedback schemes, right? In the UK, where I came from, it was quite prevalent, but here it's not. It's a real opportunity. And also for staff to have a staff satisfaction scheme once every 2 years. So you actually, if people are quietly thinking about moving on, if you address the issues and don't bury your head in the sand, because they don't go away, as we know, they can be talked about and managed and worked through, and you actually get people to stay a little bit longer if you want them to.
Yeah, absolutely. So the, what you asked me earlier on about the issue of, what I thought was important around the budgeting, and I did talk, a bit about budgeting time. The thing that I see most in most of the people that I assist is principals budgeting their own time very badly. And so what happens is that they can't give the kind of service internally within the firm that is really the only person in the firm who can do it, because they're invested in the firm, they really believe in it, they got a lot riding on it succeeding, and they're so busy.
Yeah,
and often they're not charging properly. They're busy, but they can't charge properly because they're busy on the wrong things.
Sure. Well, I'm very well quoted as saying that law firms are often overly managed but under-led. There's a big difference between leadership and management. There's a lot of box ticking exercises go on, but not a lot of leadership. Anyway, I won't get on my high horse about that. I'm a bit conscious of time. One of the things inevitably I have to come round to, from what you see from a budgeting angle, is around business development. So one of the challenges I think lots of firms have is they don't have good databases or CRM systems. So they don't, as a result, they don't cross-sell their own client base very well. So that might be a place to start. But, do you see that most small and medium firms actually set a budget at all? Or do they think about the lifetime value of a client or anything that sophisticated?
No, I mean, that one of the first things I teach is that knowing that there is such a thing as a lifetime value of a client and the lifetime value of a referrer, frankly. Sure. And so monitoring it is incredibly important. I get very frustrated when people tell me, that they saw X number of clients, X number of new clients this month. And in some cases, they can't even tell me their surname, and it's firms having, 3,000, 5,000, 15,000 people on their database and sending them nothing useful that will tap into what I love to call, the black holes in the particular roads that they're wandering their way down, because they don't know. They don't know what they don't know. So you do, though, because you're dealing with it every month, every year. So that stuff is absolutely critical. So I basically wouldn't take on a firm that wasn't prepared to move very quickly into having a decent database and keeping it properly up to date and working it, sending out information. And I would generally prefer to be helping to pick the topics and edit the articles so that they weren't legal articles. They were very pragmatic, and they were always based around good war stories. And the extra work, I've had marketing managers in firms tell me, newsletters don't work. Excuse me, how do you know that? Well, we don't get anyone saying that, work came because of a newsletter they got. I said, can you show me your data capture? Nothing on it about whether they've ever read anything on the firm's newsletter, and in particular, whether they've read anything about, the importance of doing X, Y, or Z. I said, look, the quickest way to do it, if you're not going to do that, is graph your incoming inquiries, not your work, graph your incoming inquiries relative to when you sent out newsletters. And I can promise you there will be a sharp peak for a period afterwards, and then it will come down.
The measurement thing. It's not, if the culture is not there, the measurement doesn't take
place. Very basic measurement. And then, obviously you can get more sophisticated as you can.
Well,
but I think Sorry, I was
Let me
going to
just
say,
come
were
back to
you
that word.
leading into the money? Were you leading into the whole thing about, you said the firms budget for it. Yeah, they budget for it, but they budget for it, the classic 5% or 10% more than last year. They're not budgeting for it forward in terms of how much inquiry do they want to drive in.
Yeah.
And also, because they don't know what works, they're not prepared to throw more money at things that do work. Whereas, I'd be basically saying, look, this works brilliantly. Let's keep throwing money at it until we find out it's not working any better. And then we can rest on our laurels for a bit,
You mentioned the word sophistication. So that comes up a lot where people will say to me, I know what to do, but it doesn't work or whatever. And I say, well, if you do something 80% well, it doesn't give you 80% result. You actually get nothing. The world's not fair. You have to do it 100% well to get a result. But again, you need to measure the right things. And most people probably don't do that or don't do it well. The other thing is, what do you measure beyond billable hours? Because if you only measure and reward billables, you don't get people to invest the few hours a week that's required to build a practice, and activities drive revenue. And then there's this, what do we do? We're not quite sure. Where should we invest? Do we spend it on AdWords? And I see horror stories on AdWords where people just point an AdWord to the homepage of a website and get nothing, or they get very poor quality. I'm conscious of time. I might get you to see what you've seen on AdWords, and then we might draw it up and have a little bit of a...
Yeah. I mean, my view in relation to AdWords is that you start at the other end. You go and have a good look at what people are searching out there. And then you have a look at where they're landing, have a look at whether you can do better than where they're currently landing, and go do it. And just make sure that you're writing in plain English, in plain language, if we're not in an English-speaking country, and make sure that the cost benefit is obvious, because it is obvious. I can turn off the tap on some things in some firms, and their inquiries will drop by 35%, immediately from when the tap went off. And it comes down to, if you want to, it can come down to a daily basis. What days do you get more inquiries? What times of days do you get more inquiries? I see some firms turning off their spending on the weekend. Well, how insane. That's when people have actually got the most time to be looking.
Yeah.
And so then what do they do about fielding inquiry and so forth? But my view on marketing is find out. I've long, 30 years past this thing about, we know that 50% of our marketing doesn't work. It's just we don't know which 50%. You've got to know. You've got to have a pretty blooming good idea, and you want the cause and effect. You want to do some things. You want to see the numbers go up. And in a conveyance, people might be charging $1,000. Okay, it's not enough. But what about in a personal injury matter where they could be charging $60,000? We don't need to get 15 inquiries a day.
Yeah.
We need to get 10 inquiries a month and convert 5 of them.
Rob, we're up to close to 45 minutes, so I'm going to have to draw it to a close. We've covered a number of topics here around budgets and people and motivation and training and coaching and BD and a whole host of topics. I'm sure people would want to learn more. If they were wanting to reach out to your good self, what's the best way for them to do that?
These days, LinkedIn. Just look up Rob Knowsley on LinkedIn, and all my contact details are there. I've just really enjoyed the opportunity, to collaborate with you on the to and fro, because, when I look at it in terms of, okay, most of these people out there, certainly when I started, they were my peers, and I could see that a lot of the time they were shooting their foot off. And that's the mission I've been on ever since, really, just to help as many as possible realize that you can be businesslike with it's got no connection automatically to being unprofessional. You can be very professional and very businesslike and still serve clients terrifically well, and not overcharge them, have lots of delighted clients, but make your practice more financially robust, which then lets you step back a bit and fine-tune things better, be more the captain of the ship, and it also lets you invest in the more interesting things that are coming down the pipeline, such as the big thing at the moment that's developing very fast is selling product. So lots and lots of lawyers now are turning over hundreds of thousands of dollars a year selling product. They're not necessarily giving up everything else. I wouldn't advise people to do that, but I'd advise people to be looking at product and saying, what can we sell for a very reasonable price, beautifully packaged, well marketed, and no lawyer touch at all in the transaction. Yes, a lot of lawyer touch in the setup, but most of it, you've already got all the stuff. So that's an area that I think is going to develop more and more and more and more. And it's been driven by COVID. You know, it's been hammered forward by COVID. It was already on the move.
Well, maybe there's a topic there for our next conversation if we start a series, Rob.
Yeah. Well, the first one's always the first in the series, isn't it?
First is the first in the series. Okay, I'm going to thank you for your time. I'm going to thank everybody for buying in today. And I look forward to speaking to you on the next one. Thanks very much for your time.
Absolutely. And you enjoy the football tonight.
I will. Cheers, Rob.
Okay. See you later. Thanks again, Alistair.
Bye for now. Bye-bye.
Ciao. Bye now.